Erik serves as a park archaeologist at Gettysburg National Military Park, a job I always wanted to have, but anyway. He has worked for the Department of Interior for the last 27 years, including serving as the National Park Service Northeast Region's cultural anthropologist and archaeologist, serving 80 parks. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and most recently at Jean Lafitte National Historic Park and Preserve in New Orleans. Erik, go ahead.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you to the Commission for inviting me to participate in this. I'm going to start off by saying that this is not going to be a site report or those kind of things. What I wanted to talk about was more of our efforts, at least within the last, I would say, 10 years, to actually develop programs that actually connect with a diverse audience. And with that, relevancy is a bold challenge for the National Park Service in the 21st century. Within the next 30 years, half of the American populace will be people of color. Yet visitation rates for people of color at national parks remain low. To inspire lasting connections, people need to see their history and culture represented in our nation's national parks. The National Park Service is working to organize and strategically build relevancy for all Americans, to connect with their lives where they live rather than where they vacation, creating a sense of place, a safe space for dialogue, and a recognition that everyone's history is important. This is an exciting time for us. Listening to new perspectives and focusing efforts on relevancy will only foster and strengthen our ties to a wider diversity of communities and viewpoints. Developing and creating park programs that engage all visitors, whether virtually or in person, ensures that parks remain relevant and inclusive. The following will outline several community-oriented projects that seek to gain insight into the NPS's efforts at engaging local communities, exploring the park's hidden histories, and to create a cadre of citizen scientists engaged in the preservation of cultural resources. Immediately following the Battle of Gettysburg, grassroots efforts were underway to preserve the lines of battle and to properly monument the positions of troops in battlefield parks. This purpose still resonates today under the management of the National Park Service. Following the battle, the combatants who shouldered arms, brother against brother, would set to mark, monument, and memorialize the battlefield. These were exclusively white individuals. These are the prevailing narratives at our national parks. Efforts are currently underway to reimagine and reframe these park narratives that are more inclusive and representative of our country. The first is an effort to understand the development and design of the park's interpretive programs now and into the future. Through the development of an interpretive plan, the park is engaging local and tribal communities in understanding what stories and histories to tell and share, whom to tell them to, and how to tell them. The plan identifies what visitor experiences should be included, what visitor experiences are necessary in order to provide an understanding of the park, what vehicles or media platform might best serve to achieve these interpretive goals, and provides the park with an understanding of what audiences or visitor experiences may be underserved. Archaeological projects can enlighten these narratives by focusing efforts on the diversity of sites that are subjected to inquiry. Framing research questions and engaging local communities of color help to direct archaeological efforts at specific sites. The recent development of an archaeological overview for the park shed light on the areas where research is needed to further expand our knowledge and shape and expand the diversity of our narratives. Archaeological research focused on a site of a free African-American man, one James Warfield, and a citizen science-based program at Richmond National Battlefield at the site of a free Black man, Richard Sykes, over 2 seasons have helped to shape how the parks will interpret these landscapes into the 21st century. It has also highlighted how relevant parks can be as laboratories and sites of learning. Relevancy is achieved when all Americans are able to establish a personal connection to the National Park Service and its programs, and can find personal meaning and value in the mission of the National Park Service. In June of 2019, archaeological investigations were undertaken in support of the rehabilitation of the James Warfield property. The park's plans were to remove non-contributing exterior and interior modifications to the building and its grounds, and to return the site to its 1863 appearance. The site afforded the park an opportunity to enhance interpretation, especially when considering the site was named and occupied by an African-American family. The James Warfield property is within eyeshot of the Mississippi State Monument, which I have projected here, dedicated on October 19th, 1973. Of the over 200 Confederate monuments on the park, 5 were placed during the Civil Rights era. Most notable is Mississippi State Monument, with its claims to the lost cause. The monument inscription frames the fight as a righteous cause. Efforts by a former superintendent in 1970 to eliminate this wording met with harsh resistance. The language used and its location so close to the site of a free African American offer an opportunity for dialogue. Consulting with Black community leaders, the park is providing context to the monuments through the addition of additional interpretive signing. We should get that signing out probably this year, and we've been working on the text for that, actually, to kind of put these monuments in context to when they were placed and why they were placed and what the inscription is. The James Warfield House is located near the intersection of Millerstown Road and Confederate Avenue within Gettysburg National Military Park. The view you see on the top is from the actual observation tower, if most of you are familiar, on West Confederate Avenue. Taken probably around the 1920s. The farmhouse and its surrounds served as the forward advance point for Confederate troops in their assaults on federal forces in the Peach Orchard and along Emmitsburg Road. Confederate artillery positions just west of the James Warfield House, so to your left on that black and white photo, supported the troop advances and drew federal artillery fire from Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge. There is no documentary evidence of a structure being at the present location until after the acquisition of 13 acres in 1845. The property being a small subdivided tract of Jacob Sherfy's Rose Plantation. Maps indicate that under the ownership of David Essex, a 1.5-story stone house and a blacksmith shop were constructed prior to 1858. Essex sold the property to James Warfield in the months leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. The stone house, a barn, and a blacksmith shop were present on the property at that time. James Warfield, a smithy himself, was likely attracted to the property because of the economic benefits the blacksmith shop presented him. However, it would be months before he would ever realize the benefits, as news of the Confederates' push into Maryland and southern Pennsylvania forced Warfield and fellow African Americans to flee the approaching army. Upon his return, much of the property was destroyed, and Warfield made attempts to sell the property throughout the 1860s and 1870s. It wasn't until after his death in 1875 that the property was sold to Frank H. Aikenroad, a smithy himself who operated the Two Hearth Smith shop for almost a decade. Joseph J. Smith, not of the LDS Church, purchased and sold the property in 1885 to a fourth blacksmith, Charles Starner, who operated the smithy and occupied the house until his death in the late 1890s. 3 consecutive owners, Frederick Snyder, Hannah Flaherty, and John Rosensteel, occupied the property up until the 1930s. Samuel Swope purchased the 13-acre tract in the 1930s, and combined with his purchase of an adjoining 8 acres purchased in 1926, developed the properties into a roadside tourist attraction. The site included tourist cabins, a refreshment stand, a dance pavilion, and a building he marketed as Longstreet's headquarters. Kathy Harrison, a retired park historian, indicated that the building, Longstreet's headquarters, was actually a portion of the Warfield blacksmith shop, moved approximately 100 yards from the building's former location along Millerstown Road. The property remained in private ownership until Mr. and Mrs. Wallace J. Johnson deeded the property to the federal government, reserving a life estate until their relocation in 2003. The map on the lower left is actually showing the location. It was done by a junior park historian. He was also an African-American in the 1930s. And then up above, you see the Swopes actually selling tourist items at the purported Longstreet's headquarters. The Warfield property offered one of the first opportunities within the park to evaluate archaeological materials associated with the occupation of a working farm of an African American. Documentary records were consulted and a systematic program of shovel testing was employed across the site. Archaeological work did identify the location of the smithy, but mixed deposits from successive occupations over a century and a half have limited archaeological interpretations of Warfield's occupation of the property. The park continues to serve as a laboratory for future research. Opportunities for examining the African-American experience. Directed research aimed at understanding the continuum of human occupation in the park provide a fuller picture of the richness of the archaeological record and continue to realign interpretation of the park. Little is known of the numerous tenant farms that dotted the park landscape or in the work of two Black civilian conservation corps who developed much of the infrastructure of the park in the 1930s. Further work can enlighten and enhance interpretation, strengthen our engagement with diverse communities, and continue to strengthen our relevance to future generations of park visitors. The photo on the lower left is the CCC actually working on a little round top. The photo on the upper right is the Bryan Farm. He was a free African-American. It's right on Hancock Avenue, right in the center of Cemetery Ridge, near Pickett's Charge. There was some excavations done there back in the 80s and 90s. And then in the upper left is a cemetery of colored troops that's outside of the park boundary, but is within the, it's called Lincoln Cemetery in Gettysburg. Work at Richmond National Battlefield in the 2015 and 2017 field season provides a model for creating relevancy in our parks through the engagement of a new generation of park stewards. The program became sources of empowerment for the students in both opportunities for enlightening park narratives as well as for personal development. This work has fostered partnerships with the local Black community continuing to this day. A cooperative project between Groundwork Richmond and the National Park Service, local high school students assisted the National Park Service in conducting archival research, conducting oral history interviews, and in the completion of the archaeological excavations on 2 sites with African-American connections to the park. The program increased the community's understanding of the park's place within the community, and the successes and challenges the park faces. By doing so, the community was prepared to be an informed and willing advocate and partner. An understanding of what is important to the community prepares the park to engage the community in the design of programs or activities that might be appropriate, identify the significance of places or events, increase the diversity of the workforce, and assist the park in the development of properties or facilities that might meet the needs of the community. The first was the former property of 2 African-American brothers, Richard and Isaac Sykes, who witnessed the Battle of Glendale Farm firsthand in 1862. Both men were among the African-American slaves freed by the will of John Pleasants before testamentary manumission provisions were legal in Virginia. John Pleasants died in 1771. Robert Pleasants, his son, and the only sibling who followed his father's abolitionist ways, lobbied the Virginia legislatures to allow manumissions, and when such became legal in 1782, freed his slaves, then hired them as paid laborers and provided for their education. Pleasants ended up giving 78 former slaves over 350 acres of land, and by 1801 founded the Gravelly Hill School, the first educational institution for free Blacks in Virginia. Today, the school serves as a community center for the Black descendants of the former enslaved people. In 2008, Richmond National Battlefield Park acquired 251 acres at the heart of the Glendale Civil War battlefield from the Civil War Trust. A portion of these lands lie on the property of two free Black brothers, both Richard and Isaac Sykes, encompassing about 44 acres. The property was overgrown and was used as an unauthorized dumping area. The site was not well understood by park staff, and plans were underway to develop an interpretive display off park lands at the Gravel Hill Community Center prior to 2015. The picture on the in the center is the Gravel Hill Community Center. It was a segregated school at one time. And then the picture in the upper right is a photo from the Virginia Division of Historic Resources files. It was the only photo I could actually find of the standing structure. In the spring of 2015, high school age students were recruited and given classroom instruction through Groundwork Richmond. The classroom instruction introduced students to archival and deed research, oral history methods, and explored various archaeological topics, including provenience, typology, relative dating, mapping, and documentation. The students visited local and park archives and began gathering archival documentation for the summer project. They provided frequent updates on their progress and their findings through social media posts. Oral history interviews were conducted on several distinguished members of the descendant community at Gravel Hill. The interviews were critical for the students to gain a basic understanding of the attachment and knowledge the community had in the care and consideration of the property. The work laid the groundwork for the archaeological excavations. In June of 2016, the students participated in the excavations of the Sykes property. Work included instruction on mapping of the site area, the laying out of a shovel testing grid, and the excavation of both shovel test and excavation units across the former house location. Students screened the materials and bagged the artifacts according to provenience. Recovered materials were brought back to the park where they began the task of sorting and cleaning artifacts. It is unknown when the first structures were placed on the property. It is likely that by the time these men were in their 20s and 30s, they had established a homestead on the property. The 1850 census identifies a valuation, and it is clear by that year some of the farm buildings and structures were present. According to reparations claims made after the Battle of Glendale Farm, Richard Sykes had 50 fenced acres and farmed oats and corn. Richard Sykes' home, 2 outhouses, a barn, a smokehouse, and a stable were used as a field hospital. Weather boarding and planks were stripped from all the outbuildings and sawed up to provide something for the wounded to lie upon or as fuel. In the case of Richard Sykes, land records in his will show that rather being a complicit person of color, shaped by the adversity surrounding him, Richard, through hard work and self-determination, purchased the land he would work and donated the land for the creation of a school to serve the former enslaved people of John Pleasants. The former school building and grounds now serve as the focal point for the Gravel Hill community. Following the war, residents founded Gravel Hill Baptist Church in 1866, with Richard Sykes serving as the deacon. In the 1930s, the county building built a school for the area's students, which closed by 1970. Now a community center, it houses exhibits on the history of Gravel Hill. Many descendants of those residents from 150 years ago still reside in the local area. Archaeological findings indicated that the house and the surrounding landscape were subjected to years of abandonment and disrepair. It is likely that the structure burnt down sometime in the 1990s and heavy equipment was used to clean up the site. By 2008, when the park acquired the property, it had been used for decades as a dumping ground for household and construction waste. Vestiges of the Richard Sykes farmstead still exist despite the razing and dumping that have occurred on the site in the last 30 years. Portions of a concrete pad and a small portion of a 3-course brick foundation still exist. These small-scale landscape features will be used to orient visitors and provide an interpretive focal point when trail development takes place in the area. The site is an integral part to provide information to the public about the role of non-combatants and the effects of the Civil War on their livelihood, the struggle of those men of color who were free by law, but still not offered the full benefits and freedoms of the United States. It continues to be an important part of the identity of the Gravel Hill community. The students' project culminated in a public archaeology day on site. Visitors were encouraged to visit the site and view the work of the students. Each student engaged the visiting public by providing historic interpretation, their personal attachment to the site, discussing the archaeological methods used, and describing and showcasing the findings of their work. In 2017, the Park Service continued the limited excavations with the students at Chimborazo, the largest Confederate hospital during the war, and whose later use served to house newly freed men. These and other projects continue to serve our underserved communities in the Lighten Parks narrative. I would point out that on the right is another program I worked as the cultural anthropologist up in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And that's where the students actually work to kind of bring back their community. It's a very depressed economy. And it was mainly working with the Latino population. So this isn't just, it's engaging all of our communities. The National Park Service continues to seek opportunities to engage a wider and more diverse audience, focusing efforts on sites that represent the diversity of our shared human history and engaging new audiences in their preservation. Doing so allows the park to highlight the programs, activities, and opportunities it presents to a larger audience. Targeted programs can create a new and diverse cadre of informed citizen science that foster critical thinking and resource stewardship. In the spring, work on the summer kitchen at Hampton National Historic Site in Towson, Maryland will offer the same opportunities to students. Understanding the lives and the works of the enslaved at the site, students will reshape meanings and enlighten our understanding of the complexity of mansion life. Today into the 21st century, the National Park Service continues to strengthen the meanings and purposes of parks and to provide a new sense of relevance for all our citizenry. And I left a few quotes there from the students in Richmond. And as I mentioned, there will be a program at Hampton this spring. And with that, I will end my presentation. And I think I finished early.
Thank you, Eric. That was really a nice review of what the Park Service is doing. I didn't realize they had so many projects like this, but that's good. Do we have any questions, Janet?
We have one that's a question / comment about collaboratively telling the stories of relatives in a region, focusing on a few family names that might have been uncovered, as you did with some of your properties here, and engaging the community, the students. And I think a common theme that I keep hearing over and over today is the importance of bringing in high school students and younger community members to get them involved and get them interested, because they're certainly going to be the ones that need to, and, you know, move forward with these initiatives and keep them going and make them. And I really love the idea of the National Park Service is embracing of making history relevant. I hear it over and over again from younger people that history is boring. And, you know, why is it, you know, why do I have to go to history class? I know it all, you know, it's boring. But archaeology is the perfect tool to make it come alive, to make it active, to make it relevant. And I just, you know, really applaud what the Park Service is doing here to bring the community to the parks, to make everyone feel included in the story of our nation. I think that's great.
So Janet, I would say, and I don't want to take Dr. LaRoche's thunder, but when I was the cultural anthropologist, we initiated a program to actually trace those that were enslaved and indentured servants in Hampton. So her phenomenal work on that project, and I hope she talks about it later in the day, does inform with names of living descendants that live nearby. With the Gravel Hill community, yes, the students actually still connect with the Gravel Hill community. The leader of that group, Gary Anderson, he has since passed. So gathering that oral history was another key component of this. The sooner we can do those kind of efforts holistically, you know, I know we get focused in on doing the archaeology, but thinking, you know, of all of the realms. Dr. Luann Jones came down and gave the student, she's National Park Service historian, she gave the oral history training, taught them how to do oral history, and taking that back to their own families, they've even done that. So those are all critical things, and the Park Service can assist in that. I mean, if there's anyone on this program that's not in the Park Service, I mean, I can provide those connections as well to kind of work to develop these programs. So thanks, Janet.
Thank you. Now, I do
Erik,
think
I'm
that,
curious, how many archaeologists are at Gettysburg or at these other parks? Seems like you have field work. Who's doing that field work?
Well, this was me. I mean, at Richmond, I was in the regional office at the time. So we had 4 of us to support 80 parks. And plus I was wearing the anthropologist hat as well. At Gettysburg, it's me. And I recently got an archaeological tech. The park has been without an archaeologist for many years. And so it's a kind of, I got here, my first foray to Gettysburg was 2013 in the regional office, but I didn't actually come on until 2019 as a full-time here. So these are all kind of burgeoning things, completing the archaeological overview that kind of reframes how we think, and the long-range interpretive plan for the park will help kind of guide where we focus our archaeological efforts. And the state has also helped me on several things too. So you guys have sent folks to help for a few days, and I appreciate that.
Well, we're glad you're there. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Wish there were more.
Well, I know Julia Steele just retired. And Peter,
Julie Steele, geez, I knew, excuse me, but I knew Julie.
yeah, we're losing people, so.
She and I and Dave Orr traveled out to Oklahoma together to meet with Delaware.
Nice.
Just an incredible educational experience, but it was a lot of fun. Anyway. Janet, do you have anything else, or should we set up for the next presentation?
I think that's it for questions right now. I'm hoping that, well, there is a question about similar school programs to the one in Virginia. Are any of those programs being done in the Gettysburg area with descendant families in Gettysburg or Adams County?
No, not presently. I worked through a program called Groundwork, and the closest one to us is it basically helps with recruitment and being that bridge between the agency and the local community. And I know they have one in Anacostia. where they come out to parks and do work, including state parks. If you go on Groundworks website, they might have expanded, but I'm not sure where they are in Pennsylvania. They might have one in Philadelphia. They're usually in urban centers, because that's kind of the focus, to get urban kids out into, open spaces and see. When I worked down the Smokies, we brought groups from Atlanta, inner city kids, and they and just like the ones in Richmond, had no idea about even stepping 10 feet into the woods was somewhat treacherous. But Cassius Cash, the new superintendent down there, he's African American, and he's had a large program of getting kids into hiking, learning, engaging in the natural world too. It's just like for some, for me, being an inner city might just feel as intimidating as for them being in the woods, right? So it's this whole program to try to get folks, this is their place too. It's not just a Civil War story.